Vexas Syndrome, a disease caused by somatic mutation, could bridge the gap between MDS and AIDS. I'm going to give us a refresher on somatic mutation. Somatic mutation is when a sperm cell and an egg cell come together, they make an embryo. The embryo will have one of the cells in the embryo will develop a mutation. The mutation um, within the cell, when the cell splits, will be shared by the two daughter cells. And then when those two daughter cells split, they will also, the new cells will share that mutation as well. So the mutation is passed down from generation to generation. Now, with somatic mutation, it will not affect all cells of the body because it's not a germline mutation. It will not affect all cells in the body. It will only affect the localized area where those cells, whatever system those cells ended up in, which is completely different from a germline mutation because number one, somatic mutations happen to body cells. Germline mutations happen to sperm and egg cells. Now, this is the gene UBA1, and it is the gene that is responsible for Vexas syndrome. It goes through somatic mutation, and um, it eventually becomes in older men Vexas syndrome. So, Vexas syndrome symptoms. According to the Science News article, deadly Vexas syndrome is more common than doctors thought. The symptoms include fever, low blood cell count, and extreme inflammation. This disease is present in 1 in 4,000 older men, and these are examples of how it manifests in the body. So in F, G, and H, and in this large picture over here, you see that it is the skin is really inflamed, very red, raised, looks to be itchy. And then in figure A, you see that it causes vasculitis in the bronchial arteries. And then B, C, that it affects the bone marrow and our neutrophils. Now, Vexas syndrome is an autoimmune disease. Um, so, first, it affects our cells. It affects our red blood cells and our immune cells. So, it can cause, according to um, the somatic mutation, according to Novelty and MDS Landscape, Um, it affects our red blood cells, our neutrophils, and can affect our monocytes, all the innate immune cells. So, for our red blood cells, it can cause macrocytic anemia, which means it makes our red blood cells bigger than they're supposed to be, and which slows down production of them, and then causes low blood cell count. And for our neutrophils, it causes them to be abnormally shaped, never reach maturity, and have these vacuoles on it, these little white areas. Now, it also affects our cytokine release. Um, According to somatic mutations in UBA1 and severe adult onset inflammatory disease, in figure 3, it causes a higher cytokine release in men with Vexus syndrome than in normal men. So it does cause that inflammation because, as you can see, for C reactive protein, the dashed line is where the upper limit for normal range is, and it's well above that. It is, in some cases, 400 milligrams per liter, but normally even that's even more than 10 times over the limit that we need. For interleukin, um, IP-10, and interferon, it is about twice over the normal range that we need for cytokines when our system is facing a pathogen. So you do get symptoms like this when the cytokines that are released have nowhere to go, and the inflammation is so bad. Now, even though it is an autoimmune disease, it is also a myelodysplastic syndrome, which means that it's part of a group of cancers in which immature blood cells in bone marrow do not mature or become healthy blood cells. Now, I just told you that because of Vexas syndrome and how um it affects our proteins connecting, it affects the ubiquitin protein connecting with the other proteins in our cells in our body. So we have trouble making healthy cells. That means that it does affect whether a person can make mature blood cells. And in most cases, those blood cells do not become mature at all. They're stuck in immaturity, they die, and then our body tries to produce more. So, um, Vexus syndrome does bridge the gap between MDS syndromes and AIDS. And because of that, we do need to see in healthcare an onset of more genetic testing, because Vexus syndrome or syndromes like Vexus syndrome show up in different ways. They show up looking like other diseases. So you would not know a person has a somatic mutation or somatic disease unless you test their blood. And then these are my references.